these are the most loyal customer base of this whole farmers market. They are here every week. I don't think it's just for money, because if they get their card punched 5 times, they get $5 in
Okay,
cash.
all right.
But nevertheless, they show up every week. I get instruction on where to place the table tonight. So they give me feedback. Sometimes I don't like it.
You
Sometimes
need
I
a
don't
lot
like
of
it.
feedback.
Yeah,
You know,
yes,
you and I,
do.
yes,
Yeah,
we do.
do.
We
You like
do.
to harass him.
So typically this is a cooking demo.
Right, typically, but we're going a different
And
direction.
you're not fitting that.
No, we're going to do something different tonight. So
But Debbie
no,
made us muffins.
yeah, muffins. But no food will be harmed tonight. So all right, so you're all okay. No food will be harmed. So
allow me the pleasure of introducing Chris Hart. Chris is, I think storytelling is such an important part of life, and someone that can tell a good story is enriches our community and enriches our life. And Chris is that one of those individuals.
thank you.
He can take on characters that have historical context and bring them to life. And his research allows him to give you accurate information on historical content. And so tonight he's going to talk to you about how the soldiers in the Civil War were able to eat. And one thing about war, one of the critical things in war is that if an enemy can disrupt a food supply chain, they can have an amazing amount of control and determine the outcome of that conflict. And so food is a critical part of any kind of warfare. So it's going to be interesting to see what he has to say about the Civil War and how those men ate, were able to stay alive in some of the most dire circumstances. So I give you Chris Hart.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, my friend. Thank you. So didn't set the bar too high, did he? No. So, like I said earlier, no food will be harmed in this demonstration tonight because there won't be a demonstration. I want to talk to you about, as Mark said, food and the Civil War. When we think of the Civil War, we think about battles, we think about all of the chivalry, all that kind of thing, but no, or maybe even medicine, but nobody thinks too much about the food. And as was mentioned, it's a very, very critical part because an army truly does travel on its stomach, as they say. Everything from when the war began, the first Battle of Bull Run, and everybody that's just outside of Washington, D.C., and everybody, the congressmen and everything, rode out, took their picnic baskets, going to have a picnic, watch the battle, watch the Yankees defeat the rebels, and the war will be over. Well, 4 years later, they finally got the job done. But there was food involved right then. And up until the very end of the war at Appomattox Courthouse, 4 years later, they were looking for food. That's why General Lee's army was on the move. They were hungry. They were looking for food. There's supposed to be a train with food, meet them there. And it didn't happen, and they ended up surrendering. So let's talk a little bit about food in the war. First thing I'd like to talk about is the boys with what I got to cook. I mean, so here it is. It's late in April, 1861. Thousands of enthusiastic volunteers. They come by train. They come by steamboat. You know, we're going to talk about the South first. They're headed to the new Confederate capital of Montgomery, Alabama, and they're gonna vanquish the dreaded Yankee. All right. Likewise, on the other side, all the boys from the north, they pour into like Washington, D.C., and even here at Camp Dennison and everything, and they're here and they're going to whip the rebels, and that's going to be the end of the war. But they don't know anything about cooking. Nobody does. That is a job that was either done by their mother, their wives, maybe a sweetheart. If it was the South, they certainly would have been, a lot of the cooking would have done by slave labor. So when the boys get here, they haven't really thought about it. They want to play hero. They never really thought about, well, wait a minute, how am I going to eat? They just sort of assumed everything would be ready for them, and it wasn't to be the case. The army wasn't prepared for that. Now, early on in the war, some of the soldiers did have some money, and they would actually go out if they were near a restaurant or a tavern, and they would eat there. But that was rather kind of far and few between, so they didn't have that opportunity. So when they did cook, when they got the food, they did cook. They tended to get things very much overdone for the most part. All right. For example, they didn't wash the beans. They didn't wash the peas. They didn't know about soaking them or anything. They never thought about how much better it would be if they were to soak them overnight. So anytime they cooked beans or peas, they're definitely very, very chewy, shall we say. This wasn't how mom made it. When it come to frying meat, they didn't know to get the pan hot enough. So they didn't know anything about searing in the juices and the flavor and that kind of thing. They just wanted to heat it up a little bit and eat it as quick as they could. Now, the Union Army, the Northern Army, did issue a cookbook, but that was mostly for the company cooks. The Confederate, on the other side, they were lucky to have enough food for the troops, let alone a cookbook and everything. So for the most part, a lot of times the boys on both sides were kind of much on their own. Now, at the beginning of the war, the Union Army, you have to understand, the Army had a little bit of, the Union Army, the Northern Army, they had a sort of a system. I mean, it was the American Army, the U.S. Army. So they sort of had a system in place. They did have some company cooks. They certainly didn't have enough to go around. The standing army when the war began was very, very small. And so a few units did have a company cook, but most of the time that company cook wasn't any better than the rest of them because he didn't know anything about cooking either. He got the job because it was his turn. You're a company you're cook this month. What? I don't know what I'm doing, but so there weren't really professional cooks as far as that goes. The other complaint was from many of the men in the ranks that if you were a company cook, you weren't very fair about it. They often felt that the company cooks kept the best cuts of meat and everything for themselves, kind of a spoils type system. And quite honestly, they probably did. All right. So again, it's every man for himself. Not only is there sometimes a lack of food, but here's something else. There's a lack of cooking utensils. That was not a standard issue. When you became a soldier in either army, you were issued, a musket and a uniform, but there were no cooking utensils. That you were on your own and everything. So often what they would do is they might use every soldier had a tin cup, and that's what they would use, and that was what they would make their coffee in. That's what they would cook, beans in. That's what they would dip out their water, dip out the whiskey when they could get it. I mean, that cup was very, very versatile, but you can't exactly cook a whole lot of stuff in a tin cup and everything. So it worked good on, like for stews, maybe something like that on a small scale. So some of the boys quickly figured out that they would go together and within a company, and they would buy a skillet. Skillets weren't cheap back then. So they, half a dozen guys might go together, throw in a buck or two, and buy a cast iron skillet for frying the meat and other things. It worked much better. But then skillets are heavy. Somebody's got to carry that thing on the road for sure. And so, again, in the system of volunteer and everything, they took turns carrying the skillet as well as getting it ready to actually cook and everything. Now, some of the food that they might eat, you might imagine, beans were the staple on both sides. A lot of things could be done with beans. Also, the humble potato. Both sides, they like their potato. You could do a lot of things with potatoes. You could boil it, you could mash it, you could fry it. You could do all kinds of things. Throw it in, stew, hash, that kind of thing. So, and of course, one of the favorites on the Confederate side were goober peas. Y'all remember that song from grade school or whatever. Goober peas were peanuts. No, I'm not going to sing. Your ears are going to be okay. You don't have to worry about that. Now, the Northern Army, they come up with this idea that, again, they always had more resources than the Southern Army. So one of the things the Northern Army tried was dried vegetables. All right, desiccated. They would take all the moisture out and dry these vegetables, and then they would throw them together, and they would press them into about a 2-inch thick cake. All right, imagine a 2-inch thick cake of dried vegetables. All right. Now, what was supposed to be done with this was then the soldier was to take this, throw it in a pot with water or whatever else, and make a stew out of it or a soup. But boys will be boys, and they didn't want to take that shortcut. So oftentimes they would just try and eat this dried cake of vegetables. So it picked up some names such as desecrated vegetables, or even shorter fodder. Not one of the Union's better ideas, and that soon went by the wayside as far as that goes. For Southerners, the main meat was salt pork, usually boiled. Usually boiled because of as one soldier put it, there's nothing else you can do with it. Just boil it, that's all you can do. Now, Northern troops did enjoy beef as their main source of protein, although enjoy might be a stretch of the imagination. Oftentimes, beef would arrive stringy and tough, and yes, full of maggots. Bacon often arrived black or rusty with mold and everything. And there are even hints of the Confederate soldiers down in Vicksburg and Port Hudson eating what was called blue beef. That's a fancy name. Try and make you feel better about eating a mule. Okay, mule, you know. And here's the thing, and it took them a long time, some boys, to figure this out. It was an amazing number of soldiers who would get their ration of pork or beef. It's raw, and that's the way they would eat it. They thought, well, why bother cooking it? And so they had, they claim why bother cooking it because it didn't make it taste any better. But then you get things like you get dysentery and worms and all this kind of thing from eating raw beef and everything. Desserts were almost things of an imagination. Okay, nobody knew how to bake a cake or a pie or anything, and certainly there wasn't any sugar to be had and everything. Now, fruits and berries could be baked into a pie, but again, without sugar and a shortening flour, they were awful. They were just plain awful to the taste and everything. One thing they did discover along the way for a good sweetener was honey would work well if you could find a beehive and not get stung. Also, watermelon juice, they figured out was also a good sweetener. However, watermelons became so scarce and popular that in 1863, in the Confederate Army camps, the going rate for a watermelon was $40. So you think Bueller's has got them high, or no, I didn't say that. No, but they didn't say anybody here. No, but we all know the price of what a watermelon is today. But $40 back then makes that not look so bad. I can't talk about food exactly without talking about coffee. Again, the Army lived on coffee, especially the Northern boys. I mean, anytime you'd be marching along and they stop for a rest. I mean, fires are started, tin cups come out, and coffee's being brewed. It is just automatically. That's what the Northern armies would do. It was regularly issued to the Northern troops. The Northern troops never had any problem getting coffee, although it was usually issued in beans that you had to kind of roast and grind yourself. Although by war's end, there was a form of instant coffee invented. Wasn't very good. Of course, in my opinion, instant coffee isn't very good anyway. But if you like it, that's great. My late father loved it, and I would say, Dad, it's instant. It's terrible. Let's get real coffee. No, I like this. So, by the way, speaking of things that came along and like with instant coffee, Van Camp baked beans, was a brand that was invented during the Civil War on the northern side, as also was Underwood's deviled ham, also was invented during the Civil War. I'll tell you more about this box here in just a minute. On the southern side, it was a little different. Mr. Lincoln's blockade worked very, very well in keeping not only guns and medicine and food out of the hands of the Confederate Army, but also coffee. So they would try different things such as chicory, peas, corn, burnt corn, anything to try and make coffee with very limited results. Even peanuts were tried for a while. So it's no wonder that coffee was often traded back and forth against the lines and everything. That'd be a good place to tell you about that as well. So there was a constant black market during the Civil War between the two sides, especially if they were camped real close to each other. And one of the most famous cases of this is down in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Right through the middle of Fredericksburg runs the Rappahannock River. And this is in December of 1862. And the Northern Army is camped on one side of the river. The Southern Army is camped on the other side of the river. And they got pickets, walking their own side of the river and watching out for the enemy. But one day they might be fighting and killing each other, but the next day they're talking to each other. And they're talking to each other across the river. And they trade stuff across the river. The going commodity for the North was coffee. We got lots of coffee. All right, no problem there. Southern boys don't have any. What the Southern boys got that they could trade with? They got tobacco. So again, it was hard for some of the Northern boys to get their tobacco. So it would go something like this. The two pickets are walking alongside each side of the river and go, boys that come across the river, hey, Billy Yank, you got any coffee? Yeah, Johnny Reb, I got coffee. What do you got? Well, I got tobacco. Well, what do you give me for a pound of coffee? You give me 2 bunches of tobacco. All right. And so they'd barter back and forth and they'd strike a deal. But so the deal's made, but we got a river between us, right? How are we going to get the trade finished? They actually built little rafts. And they would go upstream, and let's say the northern soldier, he'd put his coffee on there, and he'd push it out into the stream, and it would go downstream, and the Reb would get his coffee. Then the Reb would take the raft, run back upstream on his side, put the tobacco on it, shove it out, and it'd come downstream across to Billy Yank, and he'd have his tobacco. Interesting enough, in everything I read about it was a very, very, very honorable system. Nobody cheated each other. It might be the enemy, and you're going to shoot and kill them tomorrow, but not tonight. Not tonight. So now I come to one other important food for the Army: bread. Bread, right? Wheat bread in the North, cornbread or rice bread in the South. Now, again, when the war started, everybody's overwhelmed. This is just like, no, there's never been an army on this scale. Northern bakeries were quickly overwhelmed. There was never, ever enough soft white bread to go around. It was considered a real delicacy. But the Union Commissary General, they come up with an idea, and they issued hardtack. This is hardtack, all right? It's about a 3/8 inch cracker, all right? To make this, it's a ratio of flour and water, 6 parts flour, 1 part water. Spread out on the sheet, it's baked for about 20 or 30 minutes, and then cut into about 3-ounce squares, all right? Hardtack. Hard as a rock. This stuff, it is indestructible. It never spoils. I've had this box for years. Years, and there's no mold, there's no nothing in there. It's just, I don't want to look at, no. It's just, this was so hard. They called it $2 or anything else. Uh, Often, the only way for a soldier, and again, this is primarily the North, for a soldier to eat this, he's got to try and soften it up some way. It will break a tooth. I mean, it really will. So they might try and soak it in coffee, if you had coffee. Or they might put it in bacon grease, fat, kind of fry it up in a skillet. Might soften it up a little bit that way, maybe. So this is my favorite. So when these came in, this is the northern side, and they would come in crates of hardtack. Okay, crates of these crackers. And they were made and they were stamped. This crate would be stamped with the initials BC. All right, BC stand for Brigade Commissary. That's where this came from. The Brigade Commissary would make the bread and they'd send it out in these crates marked BC. Oftentimes, the soldiers said, no, that meant when it was made before Christ. That's when the stuff was actually. So, yeah, before Christ. Maybe so. I don't know. Like so many other things for the Southern soldiers, there was never enough. They didn't have bakeries. They didn't have things. So the Southern soldier was mostly on his own, and it would be cornbread, water, and salt. Cornmeal, water, and salt to make their cornbread. And basically, they would try and fry it in a frying pan, or sometimes they just make a mass of this cornbread, this dough, throw it in the fire, and let it burn and bake a little bit, and then drag it out of there and break off the burnt part and try and eat the rest of it and everything. Or very rubbery, difficult to eat, by the way. Again, they might crumble it in that frying pan with bacon grease and that kind of thing. But later on, what the Southern boys learned to do with their cornmeal and water, they would mix it up and they would roll it. They would roll it in a long rope, okay, a very flimsy long rope of cornmeal. And then they would loop it. They'd take the ramrod out of their musket. They'd just loop it over the end of that ramrod, and they'd hold it over the fire. The two ends would stick down, and they would bake. And the soldier would pull it back, break off the baked ends, eat that, and roast them again. Roast again a little bit more, as far as that goes. So it's no wonder then that the art of foraging became a real science during the Civil War. There was never enough food, so you tended to find whatever food you went along the way. And again, this would happen so many times. We're going on a march, again, especially in the North. We're going on a march. So the general tells the commissary, issue the men 3 days rations, 5 days rations. Okay, these are young men. They don't know any better. They eat the whole thing the first day. They eat it all. None of this, spreading it out. No. So they had to forage or borrow or maybe appropriate many things. Okay. Now there were always orders against this, but again, it's hard to deny somebody who's really, really hungry. Of course, horses or hogs and chickens were universal favorites. They're very easy to catch, very versatile in a pot. Fruit along the way, come to an orchard or something. A company marching by would just wipe out your apple orchard. If it was little green apples, you'd pay the price sometimes. Interestingly enough, as the federal soldiers marched further and further south, they were delighted with the oranges they found along the way. They were used to getting an orange maybe in their Christmas stocking back home, and here they were hanging on trees and everywhere else. Now, for the Confederates, on the other hand, searching for food basically meant you're pretty much doing it on your home ground. These are your people. You hate to steal from your own people. You're creating hardships on your friends, but still, you're hungry. You're hungry. So that made foraging a little different for the Confederates. Now, early on in the war, handouts were available. An army might be marching, especially in the South, marching along to a village, and there would be Southern belles out in the yards, and they'd have pitchers of lemonade, buttermilk, a sandwich, a cookie, and the idea was that was an incentive to march near the front of your company because that food didn't last too long and everything. Of course, sometimes they just took matters into their own hands and kind of appropriated, like I said. There's this story of the 21st Texas Cavalry. They went to a local farmer and they asked if he could have a hog. Now, the farmer is kind of impressed with their politeness. At least, they ask and everything. And he said, yeah. He says, that'd be all right. He says, well, why don't you go pick one out? Yeah. I said, well, that's okay. We'll take the one we've already roasted. That'd be the one we'd like to have, But we thought we better get around to asking and everything. There were sutlers who had wagons. They were traveling salesmen, and they would follow the armies around. And they would sell things like thread and material and paper and pens and pencils, but they also sold some food too and everything. And there's this story about this sutler. He's down in Alabama, and he goes by this Confederate army, and the roads were somewhat terrible. And this road was muddy, and he got his wagon stuck. So he sees these bunch of Confederates over there, and he says, "Boys, can you help me get my wagon? Get my wagon out of the mud." "Oh yeah, sir. We'll be glad to help you." So a whole bunch of them come over, and they're all around the wagon, and they're lifting on it, and they're heaving, and they're trying to get the horse to pull. And they're really straining. Matter of fact, the sutler, he thinks, I didn't think it was in that bad, but it's mud. So they finally get the wagon out of the mud, and he thanks them for their gentlemanly ways and everything, and he goes on his way. He gets down the road, going to stop for the night, goes around the back of his wagon, opens it up. It's completely empty. The boys had helped themselves. That's why it took so long to get it out of the mud. They kept the sutler occupied on the front and everything. But one of the best foraging opportunities always came if you overran an enemy's camp. That was especially really, really good, especially if the rebels could capture a Union camp, as happened after the Battle of Manassas or Bull Run. Tons of food were left behind by the Yankees, as well as those picnics from fleeing citizens, as I mentioned. So they ate pretty good. And then in 1862, Stonewall Jackson's men captured another Union camp, and they feasted on Yankee cheese, canned meat, bread, coffee, even lobster salad, and fine wine. But I got to share you this story about the lady who was aware of foraging, and she was prepared. So, Southern lady, she lives in the Shenandoah Valley there in Virginia. Her husband and her sons are away at war, but she's hanging on as best she can on the farm. All right. She's getting by, but just barely. Now, the Shenandoah Valley in the Civil War changed hands many times. Armies marched up and down and up and down, and so there was a lot of foraging going on. This particular day, she gets word that there's a Yankee company coming down the valley, and they're foraging as they go. And she's going like, oh, she's got some food, but she needs it for her family. So she's got several sides of bacon. So she takes them out of the smokehouse. She lays them out on her front yard, front of the cabin. She gets some flour and she dusts all of these slabs of bacon with flour. Well, sure enough, the Yankees come along and they stop, and boy, they're starting to grab up all the bacon, and the woman just begins to laugh. When they ask her what's so funny, she said, well, she wasn't sure what was wrong with the meat, because of that whiteness on it, but she was pretty sure you Yankees will find out before too long. Fearing that the bacon was diseased, they dropped everything and kept right on moving. She literally saved the bacon. I thought that was ingenious. Now, as serious as soldiers took the idea of eating, they also got quite attached and to their victuals, and sometimes they got in a little trouble over their food. There was one rebel soldier in Vicksburg. He refused to go on guard duty because he had not yet got his evening meal. I wanted to go to supper before I went, he said. What he got was 9 months in the stockade. Okay. A Pennsylvania private walked away from a commissary with an entire side of beef. He got caught stealing that. But he explained at his court martial that he was hungry. And seeing how he didn't own a knife, he would have cut a more modest piece, but he didn't have a knife, so he had to take the whole thing. What more could he do? And then there was the Kentucky Confederate who was caught stealing from a barrel of sugar when a passing guard saw only his feet sticking out of the barrel. That's kind of a sure giveaway that you're probably going to get caught in everything. Even the smallest fare could be a problem sometimes. A soldier by the name of Abraham Allen, he's from Missouri. He attempts to shoot and kill 3 other soldiers in his outfit because he accuses them of attempting to steal 2 candy kisses from him. He didn't kill him, but he attempted to. All over 2 pieces of candy. Another Missourian, Lieutenant John Williams, shot and killed another one of his own privates over a squabble over a pickle. Boys will be boys. One hapless victim threw his supper in the fire because it moved. It was covered with maggots. He was brought up on court charges of destroying government property. But accidents do happen, and this story is. Private is Frank Ballard. Frank is a Union boy in Maryland, and just outside of Baltimore, their company is. And one day, a wagon load of fresh white bread shows up. Remember, I said that was a rarity. So that is a treat and a half. And the wagon shows up, and they just dump all these wonderful loaves of bread on the ground. But it's white bread. We don't care. So word gets out, and every soldier in the camp is swarming over there to get this, white bread. So Frank comes up with this brilliant idea. He brings along his long musket. He's got the bayonet on the side of it, on the end of it, I mean. So while everybody's crowding around, Frank is reaching over with his bayonet and stabbing a loaf of bread and bringing it up. He gets one. He goes back and he stabs another, but as he brings this second one up, he has the unfortunate circumstances to bump the trigger on his musket, forgot it was loaded, and killed one of his fellow soldiers. All over a loaf of bread. So be careful there. I'll close out tonight's talk a little bit with about holidays. We think about food. I don't know about you, but when I think about holidays, that means a lot about food to me. We all have our favorites. And just like today, nothing raised Johnny Reb's or Billy Yang's spirit more than a care package from home. Especially, if that care package contained, mom's special cake or a wife or sweetheart's cookies. Those are good to get and everything. Sometimes they got pretty ingenious as to what they would send. Now, for example, technically speaking, in the Union Army, liquor was forbidden in camp. Yeah, right, okay. Well, this one family from Indiana, they sent their son a care package. In it had several cooked turkeys. All right. Inside the cooked turkey, if you got inside the turkey, was a jar of moonshine. So I don't think they cared so much about the turkey, but they loved the moonshine and everything. Now, the problem with those packages sometimes, too, is the fact that the provost guard was supposed to be in charge of making sure you got your package. But they had this terrible habit of going through the packages first, pulling out the stuff they wanted, or just leave them lay outside in the rain and that kind of thing. So they weren't friends of the soldiers either. But what holiday has better association with food than Christmas, right? Absolutely. And that was true during the Civil War as well. Now, this is how it differed. During the first year of the war, Christmas 1861, a Virginia private reported in his journal that he dined on, and I quote here, eggnog, ham, turkey, chicken, corned beef, 2 varieties of pickles, and 3 kinds of cakes and pies. Well, a pretty good feast to me. What they would do is they would get their care packages and they would pull them together and they would have a grand feast. So first year, the war's gone pretty good and there's food and everything. Just a year later, in 1862, another Virginia boy was delighted when he received a Christmas stocking from home, and it contained here, and I quote, 6 peanuts, 9 persimmons, some dried apples, a couple of hickory nuts, a piece of hardtack, and a corn oven. That was his Christmas that year. A little different than that feast just a year before. And by 1864, things were even worse. Eggs for your holiday eggnog were extremely rare. And in Richmond, the price of a turkey in 1864 for a Confederate soldier, if he wanted a turkey for dinner, Christmas dinner, anywhere from $50 to $100 for a turkey. Out in the trenches around Petersburg, one North Carolina soldier wrote home that he made his Christmas dinner that year on roasted rat. That was his Christmas dinner in the trenches. Interestingly enough, now Easter was a cause for celebration on both sides. I was fascinated with this when I did the research. Some lucky soldiers from the 58th North Carolina actually got Easter boxes from their home. Those boxes contained boiled and colored eggs. All right, so they were coloring eggs back then. But the eggs had their wives' names on them and special sentiments that had been written in wax. Remember how I used to write with the crayon on the eggs and then color it? Apparently they were doing that back in the Civil War. I didn't say what the sentiments were. Maybe we don't want to know what they were. Now, Union troops observed 2 holidays that the enemies did not. 4th of July. 4th of July. Now, originally, 4th of July, that's America's birthday. So that was kind of celebrated on both sides the first year or two. But then came the 4th of July, 1863. And 2 terrible things happened on that date, 4th of July, 1863. The day before, the Battle of Gettysburg ends in a huge Confederate defeat. And on July 4th, 1863 itself, the city of Vicksburg on the Mississippi surrenders to Union forces after months of siege. It is a known fact that the 4th of July after that became a very black day on the Confederate calendars. The city of Vicksburg actually did not celebrate the 4th of July again until in the 1940s. Grudges last a long time in the South and everything. Thanksgiving was strictly a Northern holiday. President Lincoln had declared that, so the soldiers would try and throw together a little feast for that and everything. One other one that was popular on both sides was St. Patrick's Day. Irish on both sides celebrated that day, although I think it was more about the liquid beverage than about the food, shall we say, and everything. Like everything else about the war, these holiday meals, fondly remembered by those who served. And like many other of the war stories, as time went on, the dishes remembered became more imaginative, the flavors became greatly enhanced. So, again, I thank you for the opportunity to share with you a few stories about the war, about the food. Again, if I've enlightened you a little bit, then I've done my job. Again, I could pass around the hardtack, but your all teeth look pretty good, so we don't want to break anything of that. I don't claim to be an expert by any means, but I have done a little research. Does anybody have any questions about anything about? Yes, please.
Any of the soldiers on either side, were they known to forage for
They would have foraged. Yes. Oh, I will. That's my producer, my son. Yeah. Thank you. So, on either side, did they known to forage for mushrooms and everything? Uh, I think particularly the northern boys in the proper mushroom season, they would have looked for those. I mean, these were farm boys, pretty much a lot of farm boys, so they would have known where to look for mushrooms. Anything they found that they could eat, they would have eaten. So yes, I'm sure. I don't know so much about the South. I don't know how mushrooms grow in the South, but again, those Southern boys were awful hungry, so they would have been. You know, I hope they have better luck looking for mushrooms than I do. What else? What else can we? Anybody want to be enlightened about anything that from the food? Again, it was a time where you just didn't think about. I didn't, I've been a big fan of the Civil War for a long time, but I never thought much about the food. I just figured they just ate. But again, that was most of them were very, very glad to get home to mom or sweetheart or wife's home cooking. So
Were there many camp followers?
uh,
Like
yes,
women that followed the camps, would they cook for them?
absolutely. And there were a lot of those. There were a lot of those. Not ladies who necessarily like ran a food wagon. Okay, not like that. It would be like actually families or girlfriends or that kind of thing. So they would follow, and they would cook for their loved ones or anybody else that might be in their company and do their laundry and that sort of thing. But very few of them actually had they didn't have Mama Yoder's food truck, that kind of thing. It wasn't like that. It was, but they'd take care of their own. Uh, Again, on the southern lines, there were slaves that did follow sometimes and cook for especially the officers. But so many, many southern soldiers didn't own slaves. They were farm boys again. They didn't own a slave at all. So again, they're on their own and everything. But the officers and stuff, slaves would like, for example, General Lee. I mean, he had his own slave, and they would cook. So the officers always ate pretty good. But yeah. So family would follow. Family would follow. What else? What else? So. Well, again, I want to thank you all for coming out. I want to thank you, sir, for having me. It's been my pleasure to share with you. I'll be around if you have any other questions. So I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.